The crunch of gravel under foreign tires shattered the morning silence of my land. At 70 years old, I had woken up to roosters crowing, to the creak of my century-old windmill, to the hum of cicadas in the summer dawn, but never to the growl of construction trucks tearing through my family's heritage. When I stepped outside that morning, the dry scent of dust and diesel filled the air, swirling like smoke over the open prairie. My boots hit the dirt as I walked toward the ruckus, heart pounding. And there it was, a line of neon-vested workers and heavy equipment, carving a raw scar of road straight through the middle of my 150-year-old ranch. The land wasn't just mine, it was my grandfather's, then my father's, then mine to protect. Each fence post, each oak tree, each cattle trail carried the weight of memory, and yet here, without warning, a road was being gouged into it as if it were nothing but empty space on a developer's map. I shouted, my voice cracking against the metallic clang of machinery. "Stop! What the hell do you think you're doing on my property?" The crew paused, hesitant, but it was the man in the pressed shirt and sunglasses who turned toward me. Young, barely 30, maybe early 30s, with the kind of polished arrogance that reeked of boardrooms and cheap authority. His name was Ryan Miller, though I didn't know it then. All I knew was the smirk tugging at his lips as if my anger was entertainment. "Sir," he said, casual and dismissive, "this is an authorized access road. HOA approval. It'll serve the whole community." My chest burned hot. HOA approval? I don't care if the president signed it in gold ink. This is my land. You don't get to bulldoze history just because it's convenient. He lifted a clipboard, tapping the papers clipped inside. "We have permits. You'll want to take it up with the board. In the meantime," he gestured to the machines, "the work continues." Behind him, engines roared back to life. My ranch, my sanctuary, shook with the violence of progress. The sight was dizzying. My cattle scattered. Dust coated my tongue, bitter as betrayal. I ran forward, planting myself in the fresh-cut path of the road, the sun beating down on my shoulders. Over my dead body, the workers froze again, uncertain, eyes darting between me and the young man in charge. Ryan didn't flinch. He didn't shout. He just slid his sunglasses off, revealing eyes sharp and cold, the kind of eyes that didn't see me as a man, just an obstacle. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said softly, almost kindly. But there was steel in his tone. "Step aside, or there will be consequences." For a heartbeat, it felt like the whole ranch held its breath. The windmill creaked in the distance. A hawk circled overhead. My boots dug into the dirt where my father once taught me to ride, where my grandfather once built the first fence by hand. This land wasn't just property. It was blood, bone, and history. "I'm not moving," I told him, voice steady. And that was when he smiled. Not the nervous grin of someone caught out, but the slow, patient smile of a man who already believed he had won. The engines idled, the dust settled, and Ryan leaned close, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You'll regret this." The words slithered into me like poison. I didn't know it then, but this wasn't just about a road. This was about power, about an HOA president who thought he could rewrite history, and an old rancher who refused to bow. The machines waited, the workers hesitated, and I stood there alone, staring down a man half my age who had the weight of the board behind him. The question wasn't whether I could stop them today. The question was, how far would this man go to break me? By the time the county deputy's blue lights crested the hill, the machines had idled down, and the heat shimmered above the raw strip they'd carved into my pasture like an open wound. I stood in the middle of it with my hat in one hand and dust on my tongue, a 70-year-old man trying to hold back a century and a half with nothing but stubbornness and the truth. The deputy took his time getting out, palms open in the way of men who've seen tempers faster than sense. We exchanged nods. He knew me. Everybody around here did. Not because I was special, because I was constant. "Morning, Mr. Holloway," he said, voice careful. "Morning," and I said, "They're trespassing." The young one, Ryan, stepped forward with a leather folder tucked against his ribs like a shield. "Deputy, I'm Ryan Miller, 32, president of the Coyote Ridge Estates HOA. We have board authorization, community approval, and a temporary construction permit from the county to extend an access road. We verified that an easement runs through this property. He said easement like a magic word that dissolved fences. My jaw tightened. There's no easement here, I told the deputy. Not recorded, not agreed to. Not in any deed in the chain of title since 1875. That's when my great-grandfather, Isaac Holloway, fenced this corner and broke the first pair of mules. The deputy looked from one of us to the other. I'm not a judge, he said, and this is a civil matter. If you've got paperwork, Mr. Miller, take it to a courtroom. Until then, I'd strongly suggest nobody do any more building today. Ryan's smile thinned. You could see the calculation flicker. A young man measuring his power and deciding how much to show. Understood, he said, because he wasn't stupid. He signaled to the foreman. The engines shut down fully. Men hopped off machines, and for a moment, my land quit trembling. But Ryan didn't leave. He walked the scar they'd started and slowly turned a circle, like a man inspecting a purchase. He stopped close, too close, and spoke low so the deputy wouldn't have to intervene. This isn't over, Mr. Holloway. You can't stand in the way of the future forever. I don't, I said. I just don't let it run me over. He laughed once, light and practiced, and headed for his SUV, dust kicking from his heels. The deputy looked apologetic. You know how this goes. I do, I said, and you know I'll do it by the book. I know, he said. He tipped his hat and left me with the cicadas and the old windmill and a bright line of ruin at my feet. My name is Jack Holloway, age 70, male rancher. I carry my history in calluses and sunspots and the way my knees creak when I swing into a saddle. I was born in the ranch house with boards my grandfather sawed himself. I put my wife, Ruth, in the ground out past the cottonwoods 12 winters ago. That hill watches the sunrise and the deer pick their delicate way through frost. I talk to her sometimes when the night turns thin and the coyotes sing. Not about big things, just the ordinary. Calves, hay, the price of diesel, the new calf with a white splash like a comet down its face. We never had children of our own, but the ranch raised me, and I promised to raise it back. People around here like to call my place a heritage property, but that's a brochure word. To me, it's the smell of creosote after rain, the rough music of a windmill groaning when a norther blows, the clean taste of well water from a pipe that runs cold as a creek even in August. It's the bran burned into cedar posts. It's the dirt that gets under your nails and never quite leaves. Coyote Ridge Estate sits on what used to be the Gearhart Farm. 500 acres carved into executive lots, their flyers said, with white rail fencing that fooled nobody but the buyers. Houses went up like mushrooms after rain. Big square things with gray paint and black roofs, and windows so large you could see the glow at night clear from my ridge. They kept to themselves mostly. They jogged, they walked designer dogs that spooked at cattle, they posted pictures of sunsets they named. On Sundays, I'd see them idling in the subdivision entry under a stone arch that looked older than it was. The stones were glued to concrete. The name was glued to memory. The HOA came later. It always does. Like a crown laid on top of a head that didn't know it was a kingdom. Covenants, architectural committees, approved paint chips, a list of violations that read like the 10 Commandments if God had a ladder and a measuring tape. At first, it had nothing to do with me. I was outside their lines, older than their bylaws, deeper than their stakes. But then the shortcuts began. A contractor cut the fence on the far north corner and dragged heavy roll-offs through my pasture to save himself 2 miles of road. I found the gap by accident, chasing a stray heifer, and followed the muddy gouges to his truck. We had words. He mended the fence with wire so flimsy a child could break it, and left me to fix it right. I didn't tell the sheriff. Some lessons a man learns best with a boot heel and a glare. Next came the joggers who decided my ranch roads were scenic trails. I posted signs. No trespassing, no exceptions. Most obeyed. The occasional one didn't. I'd ride up on my gelding, old Amos, and keep the conversation polite but firm. You'd be surprised how many people will swear an app told them the land was public. Then came the letter. It arrived in a white envelope with a logo that looked like a compass rose wearing a tie. Coyote Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. Inside, polite and smug words in a sans serif font. Dear Mr. Holloway, we hope this letter finds you well. The Coyote Ridge community is growing, and with growth comes opportunity. In reviewing historical maps and local usage, our board has discovered a pre-existing farm tract historically used by neighboring properties, an implied easement, leading from County 12 to the east boundary of our subdivision. For the good of the community and public safety, we are formalizing this access as a secondary emergency route. We will be coordinating with the county. Your cooperation is appreciated. Sincerely, Ryan Miller, President, age 32, Coyote Ridge Estates, HOA. The words were soft as velvet and sharp as a skinning knife. I read it at the kitchen table with the morning sun, finding the scratches in the wood and lighting up the dust in the air like confetti. I poured coffee so black it was a mirror and stared at my face in it. Implied easement, formalizing access, for the good of the community. I drafted my response with a pen that had signed feed invoices and sale bills and once, long ago, a marriage license. I copied the legal description from my deed. Meets and bounds in a curl of cursive older than the subdivision itself. I attached a photocopy from the records office showing no easements across the parcel, only the county road bordering the south edge. Then I drove the packet to their drop box myself, because some things you don't trust to chance. The next week, a drone hummed over my north pasture like a mechanical wasp. I lifted my hat and squinted up at it until it drifted off. The week after that, a survey crew appeared at my fence line unannounced, clambered through without so much as a knock, and started planting little orange flags like they were claiming Mars. I was polite the way a loaded shotgun on a tailgate is polite. They retreated. That night, I found one flag pinned into the earth inside the line by a good foot. People call that a mistake when they make it. I call it a test when I find it. I told myself it would die down. That's what time teaches you. Most fires burn themselves out if you don't feed them. But Ryan was not a grass fire. He was a gas leak, invisible until the room exploded. The first time we met in person was at a county planning meeting. I still didn't know his name. I only knew the scent he wore, something expensive and citrusy that felt wrong in a room that smelled of paper and old scuffed floors. He stood at the lectern with a clicker and a mass of mock-ups behind him, aerials with perfect little gray houses and arrows pointing to the future. He was smooth in the way of boys who learn to argue before they learn to listen. We're not asking for anything extraordinary, he said. We're asking for what's already there. This farm track, he pointed to a ghost line someone had drawn across my land, has been used by the surrounding properties for decades. We propose to upgrade it for emergency and secondary access. I rose when they opened the floor. My hat came off. My voice didn't shake. My name is Jack Holloway. I'm 70 years old. I've lived my entire life on the ranch you're discussing like it's a vacant lot. There is no recorded easement across my land. My family has, on occasion, allowed neighbors to cross to move cattle or reach a downed fence. That was neighborliness, not a public road. If Mr. Miller has an easement, he can show it in the records. If he doesn't, he cannot cut one through my property by committee. Some folks in the chairs shifted, not wanting to be seen nodding. The county planner, a woman with tired eyes, thanked us both and said the item would be continued. That's bureaucracy, for we're going to let this stew in a drawer until someone forgets. I didn't forget. Neither did Ryan. Soon after, I started getting copies of violation notices sent to me, not to Coyote Ridge homeowners, to Jack Holloway. They cited me for unscreened agricultural equipment visible from the subdivision entrance. I pinned the letter to my fridge, where the magnet made a clicking sound like a trigger. A week later, another. Noxious vegetation near the shared boundary, creating an aesthetic detriment to the community. They meant my mesquite and blue stem and the one old cedar the hawk loves. I laughed. Then I noticed the addresses on the envelopes. To homeowner, not neighbor, not Mr. Holloway. Homeowner, as if being called one made me theirs. A truck I didn't recognize began parking at the far end of my road in the evenings. Lights off, engine ticking as it cooled. Once I walked out with my flashlight, beam steady, shoulders square. The truck pulled away slowly, the driver's face a pale rectangle behind glass. Another night, I found my mailbox door open and empty when I knew I should have gotten a notice from the tax office. The next day it turned up, creased and mud-specked, on my porch. Someone was letting me know they could reach me even when they couldn't touch my land. In town, folks pretended not to choose sides. Old man Riggs at the feed store asked, "You getting along with those HOA folks up there?" The way a doctor asks if your chest still hurts. The pastor shook my hand after service and said, "You'll handle it with grace, Jack." And I wondered if that meant he knew I couldn't afford a lawyer. On Wednesdays at the diner where the eggs come out hot and the waitress calls everyone hun, I heard bits of talk from the table of young dads in golf shirts. Emergency access, public safety, that old guy up the road. They weren't cruel, just sure of themselves in the way of men whose battles fit on a whiteboard. I kept working. You always keep working. Fences don't care about politics, neither do cows. I rode the fence line at dawn when the air tasted like metal and hope. I mended a section by the creek the last flood had worried loose. I brushed old Amos until his coat shone like burnished oak. I spoke to Ruth under the cottonwoods and said, "They've picked a fight with the wrong part of history," and felt foolish and right at the same time. One evening, my nearest neighbor, Nora, a widow about my age with hands strong from her own small acreage, pulled up in her dusty Subaru with a casserole and a look I could read across the yard. We sat at my table, forks clinking softly. "I heard they brought dozers onto your land," she said. "They did," I said, "and they'll try again." She set her fork down. "I can speak at a meeting. Folks listen to me less than they used to, but some still do." I shook my head gently. "I won't ask anyone to stand between a machine and their mortgage. Coyote Ridge doesn't like dissenters." She reached across and covered my hand with hers, warm and dry. "You don't have to ask. We remember who fixed our pipes in that freeze. We remember who plowed a path to the church when the snow came up to our knees." Her words were a balm and a warning. People would help quietly. People would also watch quietly to see who won. That night I couldn't sleep. The drone came again. I heard it before I saw it, a thin, insistent whine. I stepped out into the yard and turned the porch light off. The stars were thick. The Milky Way spilled like sugar. The drone's green eye winked and drifted away when it found nothing to see but an old man and his ghosts. I stood in the dark and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not fear exactly, but a knowledge of the edges of my power. You can put your back against a door. You can brace it with your weight and the weight of those who made you. But if the other side keeps pushing, you need more than pride. You need leverage. The next morning, I drove 40 miles to the county seat and spent half a day in the records office, where the air smells like toner and old coffee. I pulled deed books heavy as anvils and traced my property's history with my finger like a blind man reading Braille. Isaac to Thomas to George to Jack. No easements, no reservations. I made copies. I scanned them into a thumb drive the clerk sold me for $5 and a shrug. I asked for the county's temporary permit Ryan claimed to have. The clerk found it in a stack with a pink tag clipped on, "Conditional, pending dispute resolution." I photographed it with my phone. Conditional, pending. Words that could hold or burst. On my way out, a young man in a sport coat too tight in the shoulders held the door and said, "Mr. Holloway?" His smile was practiced and friendly, like a bank's. "I'm with Miller and Keene. We represent Coyote Ridge Estates." "You're early," I said. "You usually show up after the trouble, not before." He laughed as if I'd made a good joke. "We'd love to avoid trouble. I think there's a way forward that works for everyone. A small strip centered on that track, compensated at fair market value. The HOA maintains it. You retain your operation, emergency teams get access, and response times drop. You become the man who helps save lives." "Who told you I needed saving?" I asked. "Or names?" "Ryan speaks highly of you," he said. "He wants to be a good neighbor." Neighbor, as if the word fixed everything it touched. I left him holding the door he'd offered me and went home. That afternoon, another envelope came. This one was thicker. Notice of intent. Temporary restraining order sought. Heavy language that thumped onto my kitchen table like a fist. The gist: I would not impede the construction of an HOA-approved road over a pre-existing route. They cited emergency services, community welfare, and a statutory stew meant to make a layman blink. They attached an exhibit, yet an aerial image with a skinny gray line drawn across my pasture, where cattle had worn a path between tanks in dry years. They called it historic access. I called it what it was: cows going where cows go. I walked that line before sundown. The grass rasped my jeans. Grasshoppers clicked and sprang. I stopped at the exact place where Ryan's men had peeled the earth. I crouched and pressed my palm to the dirt, feeling the residual warmth. The road would run past the cottonwoods and within sight of Ruth's Hill. That knowledge went through me like cold water. This wasn't just about land. It was about memory, dignity, the ritual of a man speaking to his dead at dawn without headlights washing over the grave. I set a chain across the gap that evening, not to start a war, to mark a boundary the way men mark them when they mean to be clear and decent. I hung a sign: no access, private property, contact owner with my number below. I slept lightly. At sunrise, an HOA pickup truck idled by the gate. Ryan leaned on the hood, holding a to-go coffee, sunglasses perched in his hair, 32 years old and every one of them sharp. "We're past polite letter," he said. "This is happening." "Then do it right," I said. "Buy it, or go around." He took a sip. "Around costs money. This costs signatures." "That's not how property works," I said. He eyed the chain, the sign with my number. "You can't block public safety." "Show me the public," I said. "Show me the safety." He smiled like I'd played my part. "See you at the hearing." As he turned to go, a gust lifted dust from his tires and flung it in my face. It tasted like rust and something I couldn't name. The aftertaste of a fight that would not stay between our fences. I watched his taillights go and thought of Ruth, of Isaac, of my father's hands on mine, when he taught me to set a post, plumb and true. The stakes were simple and absolute. My land, my history, my right to say where a road goes and where it doesn't. If I lost, I'd lose more than acreage. I'd lose the quiet that lets a man hear himself think. I'd lose the line my people held for a century and a half. The windmill creaked. The hawk pierced the morning with a cry. And down the hill from the subdivision came the hum of lawn crews and air conditioners and a life that believed problems could be paid to be paved. I went inside and made a list with a carpenter's pencil on a yellow pad. Records, survey, photographs, witnesses, leverage. Somewhere inside those words was the fulcrum I needed. Somewhere in the paper was the weight to move the world. But even as I laid my plan out neatly on the table, something in the back of my mind picked at me like a thorn in a sock. The drone, the mailbox, the truck was idling in the dark. Those were not just tests. They were scouting runs. Ryan liked to win before the meeting started. If he was this confident now, what did he already have that I didn't know about? I capped the pen, folded the yellow page into my shirt pocket, and stepped back onto the porch into a morning that felt a degree tighter than the one before. Somewhere a door had opened. I couldn't see it yet, but I could feel the draft. The first court date came faster than I expected. It wasn't a trial, just a preliminary hearing. I walked into that county courthouse with my boots clicking against tile worn thin by generations of disputes. Divorce, debt, land, same building, same air of stale paper and quiet desperation. My hat came off at the door, though most men younger than me forgot that kind of courtesy. Ryan was already there, sitting 2 rows back, legs crossed, suit sharp enough to cut. 32 years old and already looked like he practiced smiling in mirrors until it came out just right. He gave me a nod as if we were neighbors meeting at the grocery store, not adversaries with steel in our words. His lawyer did most of the talking. They called it community necessity. They called me obstructive. They used phrases like historic access and emergency response time reduction. I handed over my packet of deeds, surveys, and maps. My voice didn't shake. "There is no easement," I said, "and no consent. My family's land is not a shortcut." The judge, gray hair, tired eyes, didn't decide that day. She said she'd review, but her gaze lingered a second too long on Ryan, like she'd seen a dozen young men just like him. Smooth, pushy, certain the law bent toward progress. Outside, Ryan caught up to me on the steps. "This could have been easy," he said. "You could have taken a check, bought yourself a quiet retirement." "This is my quiet retirement," I said, gesturing at the horizon. "And it's worth more than your check." He smirked. "We'll see how much it's worth when the fines start." The first notice landed 2 weeks later. $500 fine for obstruction of emergency access. It came in a white HOA envelope, even though I wasn't under their jurisdiction. The gall made me laugh. A deep, bitter laugh that echoed off the kitchen walls until it sounded like someone else was laughing with me. I tossed it in the drawer. The second came 3 days later. $750 for unscreened equipment. They had photographed my hay baler, half tarped, and stapled the picture to the notice. The third, $1,000 for failure to maintain vegetation. A picture of mesquite, roots tangled, thorns sharp. They called it noxious. I called it shade. Each fine grew larger. Each envelope is thicker. A stack started forming in the drawer, heavy enough to make it stick when I pulled it open. One evening, I sat with the drawer open, staring at the pile. My hand trembled. Not with fear, but with exhaustion. 70 years old and I'd fought drought, fire, disease. I'd rebuilt fences blown down by tornadoes, lifted calves slick with afterbirth, and buried my wife in the hard red earth. But I'd never fought paper. The paper didn't bleed. The paper didn't break. Paper multiplied. Neighbors started whispering. At church, folks avoided eye contact. At the diner, conversations hushed when I walked in. One man, young, new to the area, stopped me by the counter. "You're Holloway, right? The one fighting the HOA?" I nodded. He shook his head. "Man, just let them have the road. It's not worth it." I looked at him. Clean hands, soft shirt, eyes that had never watched a cow die in a drought. "Worth is exactly what it's about." He didn't reply. He just walked out, jingling the doorbell behind him. Nora visited again, casserole in hand, but her voice was tight. "They came to my place," she said. "Asked questions about your boundaries, about old times, who crossed where. They wanted me to say I'd used your road for emergencies." "And did you?" I asked. She met my gaze steadily. "I told them no. I told them it was your land, your rules. But Jack," her eyes softened, "they'll find someone who says yes. They'll find anyone they need." A drone hovered low one evening, buzzing my porch light like a giant insect. I lifted the old Remington and sighted it in. One squeeze and it fell like a shot bird, clattering into the dirt. The next day a letter arrived. Cease and desist. Destruction of community property. They claimed the drone belonged to a neighborhood watch program. I pinned it to the fridge. Then my cattle found the fresh-cut road again. The machines were back, quiet this time, working fast before I could catch them. I raced down, Amos's hooves pounding the dirt, my breath ragged. I cut across the pasture, waving, shouting. They stopped only when I blocked the bulldozer with my horse. Ryan climbed out of a black SUV, calm as ever. "Mr. Holloway, this is inevitable. You're burning goodwill faster than you realize." "Goodwill," I barked. "You cut my fences. You harass my neighbors. You fine me with rules that don't even apply." He adjusted his cufflinks like he was at a board meeting. "You're fighting progress, Jack, and progress doesn't lose." For a moment under that blazing sun, I thought about swinging down off Amos and planting my fist in that smug, 32-year-old jaw. But violence wouldn't save my land. Proof would. I turned Amos sharply, dust spraying. "You just made your biggest mistake, son," I said. "You came back onto my land after I told you no, and I'll have witnesses." Nights grew longer, darker. The hum of cicadas turned into a constant buzz in my skull. I sat by Ruth's grave telling her about the fight. "They're trying to break me, Ruth. Not just the land, me. They want to bury me under paper and concrete." I paused, feeling foolish. But the cottonwoods rustled, and in that moment, I swore I heard her voice. Not words, just presence. The strength I needed. The fines kept coming. The meetings grew louder. Ryan strutted like a general, neighbors nodding behind him. He spoke of safety, community, and the greater good. Every word was a brick stacked against me. But I wasn't alone. Quietly, slowly, people began slipping me notes, photographs, whispers. One man handed me a thumb drive in the diner parking lot. Security footage, he said, shows their trucks crossing at night. Another neighbor, eyes darting, slid me a folded page. Minutes from their meeting, they said they'd teach the old man a lesson. Piece by piece, I built my arsenal. Paper for paper, proof for proof. Still, the pressure mounted. My mailbox was smashed one night. The post splintered. A dead coyote was left on my fence line. Warnings, threats, and yet each one hardened me. Ryan stood at the front, PowerPoint glowing behind him, pictures of my land with that fake road drawn bold across it. "This is about saving lives," he said, voice smooth. "Every minute counts in an emergency. Mr. Holloway is blocking that, and we, the community, cannot allow it." Murmurs of agreement. The crowd leaned toward him. I rose, slow, deliberate. "You talk about lives, Ryan. Let's talk about truth." I pulled out photographs, their trucks cutting fences at night, meeting minutes with their threats, drone footage that wasn't theirs. The thumb drive with the time-stamped video. The room stilled, the board shifted. Ryan's face twitched. Just once, but enough. I placed the final paper down. The county permit stamped conditional. Pending. "You lied," I said, voice hard. "You said you had authorization. You never did." Gasps, whispers. The weight shifted. For the first time, Ryan's polish cracked. And that was when I knew. The climax was coming. The trap was set. The county courtroom was packed that morning. Word had spread, not just about the lawsuit, but about the spectacle. Rancher versus HOA president. Old blood versus new money. I walked in with my boots polished, hat in hand, papers tucked under my arm like a shield. 70 years old and carrying a century and a half of history in my step. Ryan was already there, of course, perched at the plaintiff's table with his lawyer, navy suit gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He looked calm, too calm, like a man convinced he'd already won. The judge entered. Gavel rapped, murmurs hushed. The air smelled of dust and ink and anticipation. Ryan's attorney began, voice slick as oil. "Your Honor, this case is simple. The community's safety requires a secondary road. Records show a historic farm track across Mr. Holloway's property. Our client, President Miller, sought only to formalize it. Instead, Mr. Holloway obstructed, endangered, and repeatedly interfered with lawful construction." He clicked a remote, and photos filled the screen. My fences, my cattle paths, their bulldozers halfway through my pasture. Each one was framed to make me look unreasonable. When it was my turn, I rose, my knees popped, but my voice held steady. "Your Honor, this isn't about safety. It's about control." I handed the clerk my evidence, copies of deeds, permits, and photographs. There is no recorded easement. Never has been. My family's land has stood whole since 1875. The judge flipped through, her eyes unreadable. Then came the moment Ryan hadn't planned for. I nodded to the clerk. The projector lit up with time-stamped video. Trucks rolling onto my land at midnight, headlights off. Workers cutting fence wire, laughing. Bulldozers chew earth before sunrise. A ripple went through the courtroom. Ryan shifted just slightly. His lawyer cleared his throat. "These could be taken out of context." "Context," I cut in, my voice sharp. "Look closer." The video zoomed in on a figure stepping from a black SUV, clipboard in hand, barking orders. Sunglasses on, even in the dark. Ryan Miller. Gasps, murmurs. The judge raised her hand for silence, but the damage was done. The room had seen it. "The HOA president is trespassing, leading the charge." I laid down the county permit, stamped in bold letters, "Conditional, pending dispute resolution." "He told this court the road was authorized. He told the community it was approved. That was a lie." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Miller, approach." Ryan rose, composure slipping like a mask in the rain. He stammered, reaching for excuses. Miscommunication, clerical error, community good. His lawyer whispered frantically, but it was too late. Then I pulled out the last nail. Meeting minutes, handed to me in secret by a nervous neighbor. I read them aloud, voice ringing. "We'll teach the old man a lesson. Once we push the road through, he'll fold." Nobody wants to be the guy standing in the way of progress. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, a low murmur of outrage. The judge banged her gavel hard enough to shake the walls. "Order! Order!" Silence fell. Ryan's face was pale now, sweat beading at his temples. The arrogance that had carried him through every meeting, every threat, was crumbling in full view. He glanced back at the crowd, his neighbors, his supporters, and found only uneasy eyes avoiding his. The judge leaned forward, her voice ablade. "Mr. Miller, this court does not take kindly to lies, trespass, or intimidation. You have misrepresented permits, harassed a property owner, and endangered this community with unauthorized construction. Effective immediately, all activity on Mr. Holloway's land ceases." Her gavel struck again. Final, absolute. For a heartbeat, silence. Then a release. Whispers rising, chairs scraping. I stood there, shoulders square, heart thundering. I hadn't just defended my land. I had exposed him. Ryan turned, eyes meeting mine. No smirk now, just fury. The kind of cold rage of a man stripped of power in public. He opened his mouth as if to spit words, then thought better and walked out fast, his lawyer trailing like a shadow. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years clapped my shoulder as I left. "You did it, Jack. Stood your ground. Took him down proper." But in my gut, I knew it wasn't just me. It was my father's hands steady on mine when I learned to mend a fence. My grandfather sweated in the cedar posts. Ruth's quiet voice under the cottonwoods. Every memory that lived in that land had stood with me. And now, for the first time in months, the road through my ranch was silent. That night, I walked the scar where the bulldozers had cut. The dirt was raw, but the air was still. Above, the stars burned bright, uncompromising. I placed my hand on the ground and whispered, "It's safe, Ruth." For now. But deep down, I knew this fight had changed me. I had stared down arrogance, power, and greed, and I had not broken. The morning after the verdict, I woke before dawn the way I always had. Not because of worry this time, because habit runs deeper than fear. The air was cool, the horizon painted with the faintest streak of orange. I saddled Amos slowly, letting the leather creak, letting the rhythm of the ranch return. For the first time in months, there was no drone buzzing overhead, no strange trucks parked at the road, no survey crews hammering stakes into soil they didn't own. Just the land, quiet and alive, the way it had been before Ryan Miller decided it was his for the taking. As Amos carried me along the fence line, I saw the scar where the dozers had gouged into my pasture. It looked smaller now. The grass was already pushing up through the ruts, stubborn as memory. Nature heals fast if you give it a chance. People take longer. Neighbors started showing up again, this time without fear. Nora came by with another casserole, setting it on the table like a peace offering. She smiled for the first time in weeks. "They've turned on him," she said. "The board forced him out. They're calling it mismanagement. Some even want charges pressed for trespass." I nodded. "He'll land on his feet somewhere. Men like that always do. But he won't land here." Word spread fast. The HOA board distanced itself from Ryan, muttering about rogue decisions and unapproved actions. Folks who once clapped his speeches now whispered his name like a curse. At the diner, I overheard one man mutter, "That Miller boy thought he was bigger than the land. Turns out he wasn't." Justice has a strange sound. It's not always gavel strikes or headlines. Sometimes it's the hush that falls when a name stops being spoken with respect. A week later, I drove into town for feed. Old Riggs, the store owner, met me at the counter. He pushed the receipt across, then lingered, scratching his beard. "You did right, Jack," he said. "Took guts to face him down. A lot of us were watching." "A lot of you were quiet," I said gently. He grimaced. "Quiet doesn't mean blind. Folks remember who stands tall when it counts. You've given others backbone, even if they didn't have the grit to show it then." I thought about that as I loaded bags into the truck. Maybe that was the lesson. Sometimes you don't fight for applause. Sometimes you fight so others remember they can. The ranch breathed again. My cattle grazed undisturbed, calves bucking in the morning light. The hawk returned to its cedar tree. Even the windmill creaked less, as if relieved. I walked to Ruth's hill one evening, the sun laying gold across the pasture. I sat by her stone, tracing the carved letters. "It's done," I told her. "Road's gone. He's gone." We held the line. The cottonwoods rustled, soft and approving. I leaned back, letting the quiet soak in. In my chest, pride and peace mingled. I hadn't just saved dirt. I'd saved memory, dignity, the right of a man to say no, even when the world calls it progress. Ryan didn't vanish overnight. Men like him never do. There were rumors he tried to pivot the story, calling himself the victim of old-fashioned stubbornness. But the evidence was too clear, his lies too public. Last I heard, he'd resigned and left the subdivision altogether, the "for sale" sign staked in front of his house, like a final admission of defeat. When I rode past Coyote Ridge Estates weeks later, I noticed something strange. Fewer lights glowed at night. The big glass windows were dimmer. Some folks had already moved away, tired of the drama. The stone arch at the entrance still stood, but it looked emptier, like a crown without a king. Maybe they'd rebuild, maybe not, but the land between us was mine again, and that was all I cared for. Looking back now, I realize this fight was never just about an easement, a road, or even one arrogant young man with too much power and too little respect. It was about the principle that some lines aren't meant to be crossed. That property isn't just dirt to pave. It's memory, sweat, and roots sunk deeper than paper permits. It was about standing when it would have been easier to bend, about saying no when the world said yes. I know I won't live forever. 70 years feels long when you count it day by day, but short when you measure it against history. Someday someone else will ride this fence line, mend these posts, whisper to the cottonwoods. Maybe they'll remember the old man who once fought off an HOA with nothing but proof and stubbornness. Maybe not, but I'll know. And Ruth will know, and the land will know. That's enough. As I sit on the porch now, the evening breeze carrying the scent of mesquite and rain, I hear the quiet that victory leaves behind. Not triumph, not fanfare, just peace. And peace, after all this, is the sweetest sound there is. Power can bully, authority can intimidate, paper can bury, but truth, persistence, and dignity outlast them all. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the simple act of an old man sitting on his porch, knowing he stood his ground and won.